welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez. This is Interviews from Quito. In this program, we explore some of the biggest challenges facing this country and the region. In today's program, we'll look at the arrest of Wikileaks founder Julian Assange after seeking shelter inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London since 2012. Are we living in a world where exposing crimes by governments and military is seen as a crime? And will Assange ever walk free? To discuss this, we have Carlos Poveda, one of Assange's lawyers. But first, let's take a look at this video.
Too many times, Assange has violated the agreement made with his attorney on his behalf. He can speak, but he cannot lie. He can hack numbers in private accounts, but he cannot breach policies, because he is in Ecuadorian territory.
However, Carlos Poveda, Assange's lawyer, has rejected these allegations against his client. The entire defense team is also expressing serious concern about Assange's health. President Lenin Moreno also denounced Wikileaks before the UN for hacking of private information and publishing it in digital media.
So thank you, Carlos, for being with us. So tell us, for our first question, where is Assange right now and what is he facing?
Good afternoon and thank you for the interview. Julian Assange, after the government of Ecuador gave him to the British police in an unconstitutional and illegal fashion, was taken to the British authorities and had a 12-month sentence for his crimes. But also, there's a warrant for extradition activated by the United States and Great Britain, and he's in a jail, one of the high security jails of the highest levels in Great Britain. And that's why he's there facing these charges and also possibly being extradited to the United States.
It was an unconstitutional and illegal decision by the Ecuadorian government to remove the asylum. How is that? Under which law does the Ecuadorian government say that they can remove it?
Ecuador has mentioned that human rights and international law were respected. And there are two protocols and conventions mentioned. The conventions of Caracas and Havana, which are the international tools for asylums that were used by former President Correa to give him this right, but also using the coexistence protocol, the protocol that the legal defense in October last year put a protection action specifically because there weren't any procedures to end this asylum, and this was our concern. So they could say, as the Ecuadorian state, that human rights were respected, but we have mentioned this many times and demonstrated that the due process was not guaranteed. Especially before April 11th, we requested the Chancellor to certify whether there was an appropriate procedure that would review, analyze, or end the asylum, and until now, we haven't got an answer. Even the suspension of the naturalization, which is an in-existence figure in the Ecuadorian legislation, and we were not let know about this. And it's not only the legal basis or the team of lawyers that are defending this, but also the former ombudsman of Ecuador, Dr. Benavides, mentioned that there weren't the guarantees for a due process, and we didn't have the right to defense, and it was against the consultative 025/2018 that, among different provisions, established that before ending his asylum, the asylee had to have a hearing with the authorities to speak about whether he was going to be given to a third country.
I've seen footage, videos of what happened. The Ecuadorian embassy allows the UK police to enter in its embassy to take away Assange. They kept saying that Assange had walked with the police, but he was forcibly taken, and we've seen videos of that. How is that legal?
The roadmap shows that this is not happenstance, the suspension of the naturalization figure, which does not exist in the mobility law, because first of all they needed to notify us and then create an action at a jurisdictional court. and that takes around 3 months to put this action. So he is still Ecuadorian, of course. And this goes against the Constitution of the Republic of Ecuador by mentioning that no public internal or external forces of the country can be in our territory because the embassy is Ecuadorian territory. And secondly, taking Assange under duress and taking him to a country where there's death penalty. This is all illegal. And the ambassador mentioned that he knew about his asylum being removed, but that's not true because we don't even have the termination resolution so far, and that's a serious case. And he was told to leave immediately without any type of safeguards or any type of guarantees. So here, not only international agreements were violated, but also the Constitution of the Republic of Ecuador, as well as the Havana and Caracas agreements that state that he cannot be given to a country where his life is at stake. But it's not only his life, but also life sentence, or also being treated inhumanely.
The crime that he's sought after is that he has exposed crimes by the U.S. military, and that is the reason why he faces extradition to the U.S. Is that still the case? Is that still something that he might fear?
There's something quite important. The Ecuadorian government mentioned that there were no extradition, that there's not even an investigation against Assange in the States. 2 months ago, the United States requested legal cooperation with the Attorney's Office of Ecuador. Once again, after we knew through the media, and we set a request to be taken into consideration because the investigation was to Assange. The Ecuadorian legislation allows all types of investigations, either previous or research. When investigated, there must be a right to defense and a notification, and we are yet to receive a notification so far. We know that the cooperation has ended where all the information was given to the U.S. This is one of the cases, because the case in which the request of extradition is due to the leakage of documents, but that's a single case in a situation of conspiracy. We know that there are going to be many more, that at least 4 or 5 other cases are being investigated. And this was the reason for the asylum. When President Correa granted asylum, he mentioned that there was clear evidence that there was a possibility as this. And now, it shows that it was true, and thus the Ecuadorian government needed to provide more international protection to Assange. So facing this situation, Assange, when leaving the embassy, is under exposure, and this also violates international agreements previously mentioned.
So I also wanted to ask you on what the rumors around the removal of the asylum. There were a lot of rumors that said that that this delivery of Assange was part of an agreement that the government had with the UK, or that it was done after a leak or a case that came out of alleged corruption involving Denis Moreno. Is any of those rumors, are any of those rumors true?
When we presented the protection action in October 2018, we already mentioned certain previews of what could happen. We were quite explicit by mentioning that the termination of the asylum was about to be accelerated. And I can tell you up front that in the hearing that we have for protection action, one of the phrases that we should remember forever is that Dr. Íñigo Salvador mentioned that the asylum should be terminated legally. So this was the implementation of the protocol. So the implementation of the protocol, he emphatically mentioned that it was also a unilateral position, because this was never discussed with Assange. It didn't even have a signature of responsibility. So any violation of the protocol, the immediate effect was termination of the asylum.
Excuse to take him out.
Yes, exactly. That was the reason. They were working with the implementation of the protocol. Any situation or element that is yet to be proved or demonstrated could be used. And this is what happened. Even the Ecuadorian government mentioned that there was a compromise from the British authorities. And now there are 2 letters of the British authorities that, curiously, what they show after being translated to Spanish, they mentioned that Great Britain uses a British law that cannot extradite to a country where there's death penalty. But this is not a formal or authority commitment. And even others have been extradited to the States without using this law. So there is no security where we can hear whether he's going to be extradited or not. But asylum does not only protect against the possible penalty of death, but also any type of prosecution, which could be, for example, the imposition of a life sentence or the imposition of inhumane treatment, like which was manning, or only 50 years, for example. So these are the situations that the British authorities never mentioned, and they only follow the law that theoretically don't allow the extradition to a country that holds a death penalty. There is so much lack of credibility that even lawmakers oppose this. If they say, why, if there is a legislator, they oppose to this. This is because the tradition, unfortunately, has not been to respect this type of situations, that even if they're part of the law, at the end of the day, are not respected.
And as you were looking back, Assange got an asylum through the former president, Rafael Correa, and we know the strong differences with the current president, Lenín Moreno. Can he be referenced as a victim of this division between both leaders, now that Lenín Moreno has vowed to take back almost everything that Rafael Correa has done in Ecuador?
At moments, I think that that's true. Now, everything that's related to Correa is prosecuted. It's a systematic practice against this. But we also need to remember that Lenín Moreno was a vice president when he was granted asylum. So it was not an isolated case. The Minister of the Interior was a founder of Alianza País, and now she's against it. She even used to congratulate Assange because he's a laureated journalist. No one can go against the situation that helped us learn the truth about the world, and also using IT platforms.
Fernanda Espinosa was the woman behind the idea of giving him a citizenship as like an Ecuadorian, as a way to try to have him leave the embassy protected by the law.
But now against Maria Fernanda Espinosa, a possibility is that there is a political judge and even a legal judge against this, because Chancellor Valencia has mentioned that there's irregularities and even forfeit of signatures and documents that were granted to him. On April 11, when the Chancellor spoke to the National Assembly and showed his criteria, and many areas requested political trials and even legal trials, as well as audit by the State General's attorney. So we could open an investigation about these matters as well. Even if this was given, this is the sovereignty of the state that cannot be withdrawn, not even the way in which Chancellor Valencia did this, but it opens these doors to what you mentioned, everything that is related to Correa today. I feel that is always prosecuted. There's also an investigation against Patiño, and there are going to be charges upon him also related to Wikileaks and Assange, and we also have the case of Alavini, which is another case that brings many irregular situations. That's my perspective, and that also link Wikileaks. So if we realize it's a situation that is turning into a witch hunt that follows everything related to this at the same level, and it's not
under the
fulfilling
accusation that
the human
Assange,
rights.
according to Moreno, was handling a program inside the embassy, or an idea that inside the embassy he would have been able to destabilize the government, and he held this hacker operation and listening operation inside the embassy. Even though he had his internet forbidden, he couldn't receive visits, he didn't have communications with the outside.
Accusations are so responsible because until 11 of April there weren't accusations of espionage. If we remember what Chancellor Valencia said, there are 9 reasons, and upon these 9 reasons, never espionage operations were included or cyber attacks. And right now the president in Washington called him an information terrorist. So they conclude with the asylum right, and then they continue irresponsibly, accusing other elements. So we don't know what we are defending ourselves from. From the 9 reasons, from the espionage operations when it was evident, and we wonder why weren't Crystal Ganatachi allowed when he was going to visit on April 25th. If we were to know the situations in which Assange was living, they should have opened the embassy. Kanatachi was on April 1st there, and the embassy did not allow him in. It would have been healthy for democracy and for the situation of Assange to see what was the situation of him if he has an espionage center, because it's ridiculous. Let me say that, mentioning that even the cat had a camera in his collar, and everything related to the intervention of a fan page of a small canton in Cotopaxi. That's a cyber attack. And then in the Navy school, and that's also a cyber attack. So we're only speaking about cyber attacks, even it's other things. We should speak about other essential topics. There's an international charge against him. The United Nations have already mentioned their first stage this when Assange was being investigated in Sweden, mentioned that this was likely, and demands of the United States to free him immediately, and even with an indemnification. So this could also be the end of these unfortunate events that were warned to the Ecuadorian government to respect rights, to communicate with each other. I was able to speak with Chancellor Valencia, and we wanted to have a single front and provide a solution. However, the position was unilateral at this point. And beyond this, of certain agreements that today are being emphasized, no one today can deny that once the nationalization is suspended, the forces of Britain go there. The extradition order was activated, and the arrest was for his extradition to the States, and the government of Great Britain sentenced him. So, of course, there's an agreement. If there weren't any agreements, they would have asked him to leave the embassy, maybe without even police officers there. The police were there in Great Britain, and he could have even walked to Australia. But this was all agreed and put together because we had already anticipated that there were certain elements regarding this with 1 or 2 years before it happened.
What is the possible future for Assange? Extradition to the U.S., maybe the Swedish case that was still open, I'm assuming, or can he ever walk free?
Hopefully he'll ever walk free. Why do I say this? Because unfortunately, it's a sad message for the type of journalism that you do. The investigation of the states compromises the First Amendment of their own constitution. And just some media are starting to realize this, and this is my personal criteria. It's not only a responsibility of the Ecuadorian state, but also media groups that were de facto powers by misinforming, taking away the prestige of someone that was granted asylum. I am Ecuadorian, and I cannot accept that Ecuadorian journalists could upload to their Twitter images celebrating Assange's exit. Even journalists who still consider him as a hacker, even he's been a laureated journalist. He was going to be given an award for being a prosecuted journalist, and he was also nominated to the Nobel Peace Prize. And he is acknowledged in some countries, but here he is punished. So, freedom of expression is also there with Assange. It's not only Assange's personality, but journalism throughout the world. Some people are prosecuted and others are killed and jailed. And we have certain scenarios following this. Before the end of asylum on April 11th, we reactivated the measures to the Inter-American system, the Inter-American Commission in Washington. We hope that the system today was mentioned about this, and it would have been great if it was mentioned at the first opportunity. So if there were elements, then it would not be possible for the government of Ecuador to terminate the asylum, and this didn't happen, and this silence would also have accomplished. What else do they need today? There's an element. He's in Great Britain waiting for the extradition to the States. Ecuador should speak about this. We even have a sentence which is 054 against the States, and it has not been managed so far. It must be activated quickly. This is one of the scenarios. The other one, the United Nations. What's happening with these cases? The special relator of torture mentioned that the asylum could not have been taken away. And also, a person speaking about human rights from Geneva mentioned it was not accepted. They're going to visit him in jail. And they have to mention this at a report, and this would be terrible for Ecuador, because this is becoming an international matter from a legal perspective. That's not appropriate for Ecuador. And the third aspect is demand in the International Court of Human Rights of Europe, and also the involvement in third-party countries that are also concerned about Assange. And the European Parliament today's morning, the Congressman of Europe spoke against the termination of the asylum, and even the Labour Party mentioned that there should not be extradition. And then Sweden. This was already ruled out. There were two accusations. The one was prescribed, so from what I know, we cannot reopen the case, and the second one was stopped because there weren't any elements. Assange, in this case, I was working with the official cooperation of Sweden with Ecuador, and they've given a sample of saliva of Assange 5 years before, and nothing was done with this, so it was taken away. And now what's the pressure of Sweden and the UK? There we could also get to know some of the aspects. While Sweden mentions that this was not important anymore, the UK wanted to keep these cases open in order to create the situation for the United States and the extradition of Assange.
A lot of inconsistencies, as we can see. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, Carlos, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very
We've been
much.
talking to Carlos Poveda, one of Julian Assange's lawyers, on what could happen to the publisher and journalist, and why freedom of speech is at risk. Thank you for watching. This is Interviews from Quito. I'm Carla Gonzalez. Until next time.